Okay, so I have put up on the board yet another, I'm trying to find as many different ways as I can draw this picture. I don't know why I keep doing that, but I don't know. I'm just fascinated with just different ways of looking at that and looking at what is I think is happening here between John 2 and 3 and in John 4. And I pointed this out last week, how what is happening in the narration from about the middle of John 2 all the way through middle of John 4 is this really interesting flow. And in between the two, you have, and I didn't put this on the board, but you have the testimony of John the Baptist with encircled with the testimony of John the Apostle, who's writing this story, this gospel. And then on the outside of that, you have this flow of, this question about the temple and what is the temple, And Jesus is talking about a temple that he says could be destroyed, but even if it was, he could build it back in 3 days. And of course, they all misunderstand, and including his disciples, and think he's talking about the physical building that they are present at. But he's really talking about his body. He's talking about himself as this temple that will be destroyed and rebuilt. I say this temple question, what is the temple? And then if that flows right into this conversation with Nicodemus, which Nicodemus thinks he knows who Jesus is, somebody who's just been sent from God, right? And I say just because obviously if he thought he was more than just, a person sent by God, like maybe a minor prophet or something. I don't know. I don't know what Nicodemus is thinking, but he's certainly not deferring to Jesus. He's trying to take Jesus under his wing, which I don't think he'd be doing if he thought he was the Messiah. He wouldn't be like, come with me, kid. I'll teach you, the ways of the world. So this question about who Jesus is, and Nicodemus, I think, gets it wrong, but then that flows into a conversation about water and the Spirit, and this kind of kingdom talk that's very intimately connected to water and Spirit and being born from above, which Nicodemus mistakenly thinks means being born a second time, like physically. And then it sort of ends, like the conversation with Nicodemus kind of ends in a state of conflict, where Jesus basically shuts it down. He's like, we can't have this conversation because I'm speaking about earthly things and you're not getting it. How can I talk to you about the heavenly things that I want to talk to you about? And so it just there's a conflict and it just stops, right? And then with the woman at the well, it's the same flow, but in reverse. Like the exact same flow. It starts with conflict, then moves into conversation about water, living water, which is really clear because Jesus is quoting or summarizing or paraphrasing scriptures in Ezekiel and Jeremiah, where even Joel, where the pouring out of the Spirit. I mean, even think of that pouring out. What do you pour? Liquid, right? It's the Spirit in the Old Testament, in the Hebrew Bible, is often linked with this metaphor of water and of washing and pouring out and sprinkling, all of that. And then flows from that into, "Sir, I perceive you are a prophet." Which is, and I said last week that, I think what she meant by that is you are the prophet, which is the prophet that was prophesied at the end of the Torah, which, remember, that's for the Samaritans, that's their holy book. That's the whole Bible for them, are those 5 books of Moses. Everything beyond that, it wasn't necessarily that they thought it was trash, but they didn't feel it was divinely inspired. They didn't read it with the same devotion that they would the books of Moses. Like Moses was the be-all, end-all, and the prophet that they were waiting for, sort of, if you want to call it the Samaritan Messiah, or the Taheb, which means restorer, is sort of like the second coming of Moses, because that's really like Moses is the hero of the story from the Samaritan tradition. And so the one who will come to bring the new age, who will restore all things and bring in, sort of a messianic kingdom, if you will, like that's going to be this prophet that Moses talked about. And so she's basically pointing to Jesus and says, I think you're that guy. I think you're the one that Moses talked about. You're that guy. And that's sort of where we stopped last week, which if this is really going to flow, mirroring but opposite, then that means we'd have to start talking about the temple next. And what do you know, the very next verse, chapter 4, verse 20, is what? Let's open that up. And if it has the word temple in it, like we're talking about a temple, then I think we're onto something. So chapter 4, verse 20. So right after she says, I perceive you're a prophet, oh, look what she says. Our fathers worshipped on this mountain, but you say, now why is she saying him? He wasn't talking about, she's talking about you as in you Jewish people say. What? That in Jerusalem is the place where people ought to worship. So what is she talking about? What does this mean? Why does it make sense that this would be the very next thing that she would ask about after claiming he's the prophet? So it's kind of a tale of two mountains, the Jews and the Samaritans, right? So you have the Jews and the Samaritans. This was the southern kingdom and originally, and this was the northern kingdom of Israel. And when they split after Solomon, so the Jews had a mountain that was the mountain of God, and it was Jerusalem, right? It was Mount Zion. And they had the temple and all of that, so we put, the temple there and the glory of God is there, and that's all great. And so when the northern kingdom broke off, they can't send all their people to the southern kingdom to go worship, right? Because then they might start defecting and they've got to have a way to have power. So they eventually set up their own, actually the northern kingdom, when you read through Kings, you'll see this phrase over and over again. Like so many kings are judged on what they did about the abomination of Jeroboam. Like the abomination of Jeroboam is just brought up over and over and over again. And so if you don't read Kings in one sitting, which can be a little tricky to do because it's a lot of kings, but you kind of forget what that was about. And the sin of Jeroboam, the abomination of Jeroboam, is to compete with Jerusalem and the temple. He actually set up two to make it super convenient, like fast food temple service, like whichever part of the northern kingdom you're in, you can get there. He set up two kind of temple locations, and he set up golden calves in each one that would be representations of the God of Israel. Like, who thought that was a great idea? Like, because God liked the first golden calf so much, we're going to make two more and make it super convenient for people to get to them so that they will not go south to that temple. And so they set that up, but then of course, Assyria, God kept judging them, and he kept judging the kings of the northern kingdom based on if they continued that practice or whether they tried to shut it down. And the best kings that the northern kingdom had were the ones that tried to shut that down, and the worst kings were the ones that either didn't shut it down or encouraged it or made it worse. And towards the end, that was the sort of king that they had over and over and over again until eventually, like, God's so heartsick over it all. He's like, I can't continue with you anymore. And you're not listening to my prophets. You think especially about the prophets that God sent during this time, like Elijah and Elisha, like some of the best prophets we think of in that period. Like they were all sent to the northern kingdom, which was the most rebellious one. It was like God wasn't, he held on to them for so long when they fought him tooth and nail to get away from him, and he kept trying to keep them. But eventually, the Lord, as he revealed himself to Moses, he said, I am Yahweh, Yahweh, a God gracious and merciful, slow to anger. But that doesn't mean never gets angry. He was really slow, and he gave them a few hundred years to stop the idolatry, to stop the abomination of Jeroboam. And when they didn't, God used, he's like, oh, you want to be like the nations of the world? You want to be like the pagan people? Well, here's a powerful pagan people. They're going to come and eat you up. And the Assyrians swooped in and just devastated the northern kingdom, destroyed it, and hauled everyone off into exile and put different people in the land. But then the people that were in the land, because even though God kicked the people out of the land, God didn't abdicate the land itself. In other words, God carved out a piece of planet Earth and told Abraham, this is my territory, and I'm going to give it to my people that are going to come from your body through this miracle son Isaac. But this is like God's land. And so when they put other people from other nations in that land, which is what the Assyrians usually did when they'd conquer an area, they'd mix all the people up, so it'd be really hard for people to have rebellion and all of that. They did not know how to worship the God of Israel, and wild beasts, lions, were eating people up. And they knew that it was because they didn't know how to live in this land that was owned by this God of Israel. And so they had to bring a few of the people back, some priests, to kind of teach the locals how to worship this God so that he wouldn't totally destroy them. And so that's what they do. And those people become the Samaritans. And they, when the priests come back, presumably they come back with their Bible, and whatever priests showed up, maybe all they had was the 5 books of Moses, and that's where that tradition began, with them believing that that's what Scripture is. Because when the Jews came back for the southern kingdom, because they eventually got exiled too, about a couple generations later, when they came back, that's when a lot of the rest of the Bible was filled out anyway. It was filled out, and some of the things that were older were brought together while they were in exile in Babylon. And so they come back with a much thicker Bible that the Samaritans are like, what is all this stuff? We don't believe any of this. And so they still had their book of Moses. So they got the full Bible here, or full Hebrew Bible, but that's all there was back then. And so the full Bible here, they just have the Torah. And they needed a place to worship, right? And so they find a mountain in the northern kingdom to put a little temple on and think, yeah, this is a powerful temple and God's presence is going to be there, right? Because we build it, he will come. And that's at Mount Gerizim, which I don't know if I spelled that right in English or not. And why did they pick that mountain? Why did they pick that place? Well, why did they even need to pick a place at all? It's probably a good question, right? So the reason, and the Samaritans wrote about this, they took the verse, a few verses from Deuteronomy chapter 12, and where God was giving them instruction about when you go into the land, when my people come into this land that is mine, that I'm giving to you. And he's saying, what I don't want you to do is worship all the gods that the people in the land worship. And I want you actually to tear down all of their temples and poles and all these religious sites that they built up. You wouldn't just demolish all that stuff. But, and this is verse 5 of Deuteronomy 12, he says, but you shall seek the place that Yahweh your God will choose out of all your tribes to put his name and make his habitation there. And there you shall go, and you shall bring your burnt offerings and your sacrifices, your tithes, your contributions, that you present your vow offerings, your freewill offerings, the firstborn of your herd, of your flock. And there you shall eat before Yahweh your God, and shall rejoice, you and your households, in all that you undertake, in which Yahweh your God has blessed you. So they took that command that Moses gave them and said, hey, God told Moses that he was going to pick a place in the midst of the land, that he was going to put his name there, that was going to be the place that people could come who were seeking him out. And if you just have the Torah, it's got to be a mountain, right? Because in those days, mountains were always associated with God or the gods, and high places were kind of the domain of the divine. And so you've got this land with several mountains to choose from. And if you're just limiting yourself to even the northern kingdom, there's still quite a few mountains to choose from. So which mountain are you going to choose? Well, they looked in that same book of Deuteronomy, and would you know it, there's a couple of mountains that are called out where God says, when you come into the land, I want half the tribes to go up on this one mountain called Gerizim, and you're going to shout blessings. All the blessings of the law of the Torah are going to be shouted out over the land. And the other half of the tribes are going to go up on this other mountain, Mount Ebal, and they're going to shout out the curses of breaking the law. So there's just a reminder that there's blessing and there's curse. And every time you see these two mountains, you're reminded that you're always heading towards one or the other. Every choice that you make, you're either obeying the Torah, walking in its ways, or you are disobeying and turning your back on God's truth and the life that he wants you to have. And so you're always moving towards blessing or curse. And so there was this wonderful physical reminder that all the people of Israel got to participate in, to be this big, bold neon sign, like take this stuff seriously, take the Torah seriously. And so, of course, as they studied the Bible that they had, of course they picked Mount Gerizim, like this is the place God chose. This is the mountain of blessing. Where else are we going to go to meet with God and to present our offerings and to what? Because what is the last part of that verse in Deuteronomy 12, in which Yahweh your God has blessed you? And so they said, aha, that's a clue. It's the Mount of blessing that he's talking about. So they weren't out of left field to pick that place. And obviously, you'd never think Jerusalem was super significant until much later, after what happens with David and Solomon and all that. But that's in a part of the Bible they didn't have. And so to them, it wasn't as significant a part of God's story with his people. And so they pick this mountain, they build their own little temple on it, and they're happy in doing their thing. And then the Jews come back, or at least some of them, from Babylon. They've got a bigger Bible. They're rebuilding Jerusalem. They're rebuilding the temple. And they're telling the Samaritans they're doing it wrong. And they're worshiping in the wrong place and all of that. And there's this, of course, enmity and rivalry between them that lasts for quite a bit. And then eventually, the Jews, they enjoy a little bit of autonomy, and then they get conquered again, and then they get free again, and then they use their freedom to go up north and take care of the Samaritan issue, and they go destroy the Samaritans' temple because they saw it as a false temple. And they want God to be pleased with them. And so they're going to show God, look, we're purging the land of all this false doctrine and teaching. And so they go and destroy this temple, and the Samaritans are super unhappy now with their southern brothers, who don't even see them as brothers, because the Jews see this, oh, you guys are all a bunch of half-breeds, and you're not ethnically pure, and you've all, you're the descendants of people that married in with people who weren't supposed to marry, and all of that. And you can, if you want a taste of what some of that looked like, you can read in Ezra and Nehemiah and just see just the painful decisions that were being made by people in leadership in Jerusalem along the lines of how they thought ethnic purity was the way to God. And it's just like forcing people to divorce wives and children, who were of mixed descent. Like, it's just gross stuff. And so all this bad blood, right, up until Jesus' day. And so she thinks Jesus is the prophet, or he could be the prophet. And she knows this, he's Jewish. Like, that might have been surprising. Maybe they thought that their Messiah was going to be Samaritan, but he's Jewish. And he shows up, and so she's thinking, okay, you got to settle this issue for us then. Like, part of the job of the restorer, the one who comes after Moses to fulfill all things from the Samaritan point of view in the Torah, he's supposed to make these things clear, like the things of God. And so here's the biggest point of contention between our people. Solve it. I think you're our Savior, so prove it. Like, fix this for us, right? And it's a question about the temple. Where is the proper temple? Should the temple be in Jerusalem, or does it belong on Mount Gerizim? It's a really good question. And it makes perfect sense when you, I think, understand the backstory and all of the baggage that this woman and her people are carrying when Jesus shows up. And so look what he answers. Verse 21, Jesus said to her, "Woman, believe me, the hour is coming when neither on this mountain," and so they're in Sychar or Shechem, which is literally, Mount Gerizim is literally in view. Like, he can say this mountain and point to it, and it's right there. "Neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem will you worship the Father." The answer isn't this one or this one. It's neither. It's neither. You guys have divided over something that is about to become irrelevant. What does he mean? Well, look, he says, you worship what you do not know. We worship what we know, for salvation is from the Jews. And that's sort of an interesting thing. What does he mean? The Samaritans, he's not saying that they're false worshipers. You notice that. He's saying, but they're worshiping what they don't know. But the Jews are worshiping what they know, and they, in some way, salvation, like the key or the door or the path to salvation, like they've got it. It's in their stream. And what's the big difference? What's the difference between these two groups that is tipping the scale about who knows God and who has the keys to salvation in their hand? I don't think it's about geography. I don't think it's about ethnicity. I think it comes down to how much of the Bible they've got. Right? Because at this point in time, so the full Bible would be the Torah, the prophets, and the writings. So it's a 3-part book. It's not really a book at this time. It's a collection of 24 scrolls. And the Samaritans have the first 5, or the first section of this 3-part book, right? So they've got 1/3 of the Bible in their hands that they have access to. And Jesus is saying, number one, that's not enough to know God the way your brothers and sisters to the south know God. You need that fuller picture. You need the whole. God gave those other books, the other 19 scrolls, for a reason. He wasn't just being verbose. Like, there's information there about him. There's knowledge about him and his ways and his character and his heart that you're missing out on by only sticking to 1/3 of the Bible. And in fact, with the Torah alone, which it's true that you can find messianic prophecies in the Torah, you can find hints and shadows of Jesus all over the place in the first 5 books of the Bible. But Jesus doesn't expect with just the first 5 books that you're going to be able to put all the clues. You don't have enough clues to put it together to discover who and what salvation is. You need the whole Bible to get the full picture. It's just like if I gave you a puzzle and I only gave you 1/3 of the pieces randomly and said, here, put it together and tell me what it is. You're not going to do it. You're not going to do it, right? So, brief segue. Let's pause that for a moment. When I was thinking about this, the question popped in my mind, and so I'm going to share it with all of you to answer in your own private meditations with the Lord. If having only sticking to 1/3 of the Bible and throwing the other 2/3 out, Jesus says you don't know God and you're not able to understand his salvation, would he say the same thing about Christians today who just stick in the New Testament and throw the other 3/4, 75% of the Bible aside and say it's all irrelevant and we don't need that anymore and we can get everything we need from the New Testament? Would he also make the claim, you don't actually know me without the full picture, and you don't understand, or you're not able to appreciate my salvation with just that sliver of the full picture? I don't know. So something to think about. But this is what he says to her, right? And if he just stopped there, that would be sort of a bummer, right? He says, well, you're worshiping God, but you don't really know him, and you're totally blind to his salvation because of that. But he doesn't. He continues and says in verse 23, but the hour is coming and is now here. That's interesting. When the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth, for the Father is seeking such people to worship him. In spirit and truth, what does that mean? So, let's connect the dots a little bit. So, in John chapter 2, the question was raised, when Jesus is talking about the temple, what is he really talking about? He's talking about himself, right? He's talking about his body. And so when the woman is asking Jesus about where the real temple is, whether it's on this mountain or that mountain, what is Jesus telling her about where the real temple is? Where is the real temple at that point? Right in front of her, asking for a drink. The real temple just asked for a drink, right? He's right there, right? And so what is the temple again? Like, it's the place where if you want to come into the presence of God and experience his manifestational presence. Like, it wasn't just a building, it was where the glory of God filled that place. His throne was in the Holy of Holies above the wings of the cherubim, of the cherubim. Like, that was like, oh, you're visiting the king in his palace, the king of the universe. And so when you come there, it's not just a building where we can gather and sing songs and offer sacrifices. You are visiting God. And you're able to worship him as close to face as you're ever going to get in this life. That was the temple. That's why it was so significant and why it was such a big deal when it was destroyed by the Babylonians. And if Jesus is the temple, that changes everything. Because now, where do you go to give God your worship and to be in his presence and experience him as close to face as you're going to get in that moment? You go to Jesus. You snuggle up right up beside him and like you worship him. Because God's presence is wherever Jesus goes, that's God's presence, because he is Jesus. And when he talks about, and that's part of why I think he says, you're worshiping what you don't know. And that's part of why you're right to see me as the one that Moses was talking about. But because you don't have the rest of the Bible, you don't have the rest of the story. Because as you continue to read the story in the prophets and in the writings, it becomes really clear that this Messianic king who's coming back is more than just a man and more than just a prophet. That actually, especially when you read through like Isaiah, that it's God himself who's coming back to take his people, to take his planet. And the Jews had all the keys, they had all the puzzle pieces to put that together to see that it was God that they're waiting for. And so she's asking about where can we go to meet with God? And he's like, you're right there. You're here. This is where you go to meet God, is you come to me. You come into my presence. And when he says that the Father is looking for people to worship in spirit and in truth, because before you had to go to a location, a geographic location, in order to encounter God's presence. Now you need to come to Jesus. But how does that work for us right now in this room, right? Because Jesus embodied, and his earthly body is not in this room, right? But what is in this room? The Spirit. And is his body in this room in a different sense? Yes, in all of us, because we are his body, right? And so if we're going to worship in spirit and in truth, it means one, we need the Holy Spirit to really worship him. Because when we get the Holy Spirit in us, now we can get in Christ, who is the truth. And so Jesus is saying when that happens, when you have that kind of access to the Father, to God, because you have the Holy Spirit and you have the one who is the truth and a relationship with the truth, now you can worship God and it doesn't matter where you go because he's with you and you're with him. And so all this question about mountains and temples and places, like all of that can go out the window now. Now it's all doesn't matter. Now that all those verses and later on in the Bible where it talks about the knowledge of God flooding the earth and that people won't have to come here or there to have someone teach them about God because everywhere they look, there's going to be somebody nearby that knows him and can show them who he is. Like all of that gets fulfilled. And when Jesus says the hour's coming, and he's talking about the hour of his exaltation, of his death, of his resurrection, yes, and then of the pouring out of the Spirit that's going to come after that. But it's now here because he's now here. And he's offering her and everyone else that's around him a foretaste of what it's going to be like, of what real worship is going to be like. And, you know, what does she think about this? And he goes on to say, God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth. So he repeats it twice, in spirit and truth, just reinforcing that. And think about that. Why does he say it a second time? What is he just repeating himself? Is there more information there? Well, he says God is spirit. Okay, let's slow down. God is spirit, and we got to worship him in spirit. In other words, we need God to worship God. That's what you're missing. You don't need a building. You don't need a special mountain. You need God. You want to encounter God. You want to worship God. You want to be in God's presence. You need God. And it just so happens that God has provided in himself the mechanism for you to come and worship him and to be in his presence and to know him intimately. And Jesus is like, and by the way, that's happening right now because here I am. So she says to him, I know that Messiah is coming, he who's called Christ, and when he comes, he will tell us all things. And again, when she's talking about Messiah, she's talking about the Samaritan idea of the Messiah, which goes right back to that Deuteronomy 18 prophet that Moses prophesied about. Because remember, when God spoke to the people directly from the mountain, how did they react? They basically did this number. They covered their ears and were like, hid their heads and are like, Moses, tell God to stop doing that. Like, we can't handle like hearing his divine voice echoing like thunder, shattering rocks as he's speaking to us. Like, you go talk to God and come back and tell us what he says. Like, we don't want to hear from God directly. This is too scary for us, right? And Moses says, you know, when this latter prophet comes, because God's like, I know people don't want to actually talk to me directly as much as they say that they want to. You know, they just can't handle it. So in the latter days, when I send this other prophet, he'll do the same thing Moses did. He says in Deuteronomy 18, verse 17, and Yahweh said to me, they are right in what they've spoken, which is, we don't want to hear from God directly. It's too scary. I will raise up for them a prophet like you from among their brothers, and I will put my words in his mouth, and he shall speak to them all that I command him. And whoever will not listen to my words that he shall speak in my name, I myself will require it of him. So that's the prophet, that's the Messiah that she's thinking of. He's the one that's going to show up, and he's only going to speak God's word and nothing else. Nothing that comes from his mouth will not be from God. It'll be basically as if God's sitting there speaking to you, except it's a man. Huh. That's interesting. And that's what I show you. Like, there's clues in there about the identity of the Messiah in the Torah. It's not that it's not there, but man, it becomes so much easier to put the puzzle pieces together when you have the rest of the Bible. But that's what she's thinking. So Jesus just unpacks something really quick that she's struggling to understand, and she's like, well, when the Messiah comes, he's going to make all this clear. And what does he say? I who speak to you am he. Which is just crazy. That is just crazy. Because there's so many people asking Jesus who he is and looking for just say it simply, declare yourself. And Jesus just doesn't engage with people that way. But this unnamed woman, with all the ostracism and the shame that she dealt with and everything, to her, he just speaks it plainly and tells her, yep, that's me you're talking about. I'm that one. I'm the one that you were looking for, that your people have been looking for and waiting for hundreds of years. That's me. Here I am. And so while she's, all of this is processing for her, just then the disciples come back and they marvel that he was talking with a woman, which if you've ever been in the Middle East, you understand exactly why they would be like, oh, Jesus is alone with a woman talking to her. This is a shameful thing. It's in broad daylight. Oh, our master is shaming himself, right? And forget even that she's a Samaritan woman. There were some, not all, but there were some rabbis that believed and wrote around this time that for even a married man to have prolonged discussions with even his wife was a waste of time at best. Because that was time you could be spending reading the Torah and thinking about God and all that, and you're not going to have, edifying conversation with a woman. So, and again, don't paint that with a broad brush. There were other rabbis who wrote differently and thought that was, extreme. But there were some people that did teach that. And that was certainly a viewpoint that some people had. That's how extreme it was. And so I don't know where the disciples' upbringing, where they would have landed in that spectrum. But clearly they marveled that he's talking to a woman. But no one said, what do you seek, or why are you talking with her? Again, Middle Eastern culture, honor, shame. How do we deal in the Middle East with uncomfortable issues or faux pas? We just pretend it didn't happen, and we just walk all the way around that pit, and we just don't acknowledge the elephant in the room. It can just sit there in the corner, and we will not look at it, and it'll be just fine, and everybody will be fine. Nobody needs to be shamed anymore. And that's exactly what they're doing right there. They don't want to embarrass Jesus, and they don't want to embarrass themselves because they're his disciples. So anything that happens to him, reflects on them. He's their master. They're not better than their master. So if he's shamed in this moment, they're shamed in this moment. So they don't want to be shamed anymore. So they're going to just be quiet. What does the woman do? And they're probably gaping, staring, whatever. Who knows? But she's oblivious. She leaves her water jar. The whole reason she came out in the middle of the day, of the hot day, to get her water, she leaves that and went away into town and said to the people, which should be the very same people that normally on most days she wants nothing to do with and doesn't want to see them, and there's a reason why she comes by herself in the middle of the day to the well to get her water, so that she doesn't have to interact with these people in her village. She goes to them, and what does she say? Come see, or come and see, which, that's the same thing Jesus said to his first two disciples. It's the first thing those disciples said when they went and got more disciples to start following him, you need to see this guy, come, right? She's now behaving just like his initial disciples behaved in John chapter 1. Only it's a Samaritan woman who's doing this now. And she's telling all these people who she probably doesn't think very highly of, and they don't think highly of her, come and see a man who told me all I ever did. Can this be the Christ? Can this be the one that we've been waiting for, that we're looking for? And since it was a big deal that her of all people would be saying this, we probably should check this out. right? And so they went out of the town and began coming to him. And this is, like you remember last week I talked about how this whole story has another thing that it mirrors, which is in Genesis, the story of Abraham's servant Eliezer, who goes to find a wife for Isaac. And in that story, you know, which is part of the betrothal of the woman at the well kind of, you know, betrothal scene in the Hebrew Bible, is it follows a formula. You know, man meets woman at well. Somebody does something super virtuous. Sometimes it's the woman, sometimes it's the man, whatever. And then the woman rushes home to tell her family about this amazing guy she just met. And I think he might be the one, we're going to get married. And that's part of the trope. That's part of the type scene that's played out over and over again in various forms in the Hebrew Bible, especially in the Torah. And so she's now playing the part. She's rushing, not to tell her family, but to tell her enemies about the guy she just met that is the one, but not the one like that she's going to have an earthly marriage with, but the Messiah, their version of the Messiah, the restorer. And telling all these people that, right? And look what happens right after that. And so then the disciples are urging him, saying, hey, Rabbi, eat. Oh, I skipped one. And yeah, they went outside, they're coming to him, and the disciples urging, Rabbi, eat. But he said to them, I have food to eat that you don't know about. So again, if we've got the story from Genesis back in our heads with Eliezer. So Eliezer shows up. Rebecca, you know, rushes home to tell her family about what this miraculous thing that's happened. You know, somebody has been sent from, you remember Uncle Abraham and whatever happened to him? And Aunt Sarai, like, wow, like they had a son. Can you believe that? And they're looking for a bride and all of this, right? And so then they receive Eliezer as an honored guest. And what's the first thing they do? Because it's the Middle East. They're like, before we talk about marriages and all that and dowries, and like, you got to eat. Let's sit down and have a meal together. And what does Eliezer say to them? And I'm paraphrasing the story, but go back and read it. He basically says to them, look, I didn't come here to eat. I came here to get business done from the exalted father, Abraham. That's what his name means. I'm here on the business of the exalted Father, and until I get that business done, until I know your answer about this betrothal, one way or the other, I'm not eating anything you put in front of me. And actually, if the answer is no, I'll get right back on my 10 camels, and we'll just head out of here, and I'll return. Like, I'm here to do my master's business, not to eat. That's my food. And look what Jesus says. They're offering him food. He's refusing the food. My food is to do the will of him who sent me and accomplish his work. I'm sorry, skip verse 33. Disciples said to one of them, has anyone brought him something to eat? Like they're so fixated. Like they're fixated on earthly things. They just are they're tracking on a different level, on a different wavelength from Jesus. And so there's always this kind of comical misunderstanding that happens. And, you know, it really does play out like a comedy at times, and it must have been funny for John, you know, as he's telling the story, because he was right there, like, yeah, we had no idea what he's talking about. We thought somebody snuck him food, and we're thinking, and you have to think about it too, like, they were probably put out a little bit, because they just went into a Samaritan town, an important Samaritan town. This used to be the capital, this area. It was certainly the place where they thought, you know, was what should be the center of worship, because it's where Abraham first built an altar when he came into the land, right? And so they just went into a Samaritan town, and they're Jews. And they probably didn't have any weapons on them. And they could have been jumped and stabbed and whatever. I mean, who knows what kind of reception. And they're going and they're risking their lives so that Jesus can get some food, right? They just risk their lives for this food, and he doesn't want to eat. And they're like, right? So they're a little bit put out. And he says to them, you know, my food is to do the will of him who sent me and to accomplish his work. Just echoing, that's totally paraphrasing what Eliezer said. And then he goes on to say, do you not say, there are yet 4 months, and then comes the harvest? So you guys would say right now, in the earthly sense, we're about 4 months away from harvest time. If I were to ask you, when is harvest time, since you guys like to think on an earthly level, you'd probably immediately say, well, that's about 4 months, Jesus. Look, I tell you, lift up your eyes and see that the fields are white for harvest. He's like, I'm telling you, it's harvest time right now. And I heard a brother from the Middle East say, who spent some time in northern Israel. Actually, he does a lot of ministry with the Samaritan people group because there's still Samaritans in Samaria. I don't know if you guys knew that. There's about, I think there's less than 2,000 left that are like practicing Samaria. They're still going up Mount Gerizim, offering the sacrifices, reading their Torah, all of that stuff. 2,000 years later, there's still, a few families left that are still carrying on this legacy, right? And one of the things about the Samaritans is when they go up on Mount Gerizim and do a lot of their religious activities, they wear these beautiful, bright white robes. That's sort of like when people see like this train of white, going up the mountain, like, oh, the Samaritans are going up to offer their sacrifices to God. And I heard my brother say that he always thinks about this verse whenever he's with the Samaritan people, like, the fields are white. Look at them in their white robes. Like, if they were wheat, you'd say it's time to reap them because they're ready. And Jesus is saying this, and who's he talking about right now? He's not talking about wheat. He's talking about the Samaritans of this village. He says, already the one who reaps is receiving wages and gathering fruit for eternal life, so that the sower and reaper may rejoice together. For here the saying holds true, one sows and another reaps. I sent you to reap that for which you did not labor. Others have labored, and you have entered into their labor. And I'm sure the disciples once again are like, what is he talking about, right? But what Jesus is ultimately saying is, you thought you were going into that village to find food for me. My hope was that you'd go into that village and see a lot of lost people, to see people that are worshiping a God they don't know and are never going to find salvation in what they're doing. But you, having been with me and having access to the full Bible, could be the ones to point out to them the way of salvation. But you're thinking about food. And you're thinking about earthly things. But he said there's somebody who's got it right now, and they're out there right now reaping reward for eternal life. And obviously the initial one who just reaped someone for eternal life is Jesus himself. It's like that's what I was doing here. Is I just helped get one more person into the kingdom that I'm bringing. And guess what? Now she's doing the same thing with her people, with her own people. And so this is the amazing thing. We're told many Samaritans from that town believed in him because of the woman's testimony. He told me all that I ever did. So when the Samaritans came to him, they asked him to stay with them, and he stayed there 2 days. This is, again, it's such playing on that story from Genesis because, of course, the family of Rebekah says, yes, we say yes to this marriage. So then Eliezer eats, and they eat the food. And then they're like, stay with us like 10 days. And he's like, I'll stay with you one day, but then I got to get back. Because that's just the kind of guy I am. But Jesus, in following the same formula, though, he stays 2 days. He stays an extra day with them, even though he's got stuff to do, right? But he is so, the celebration is so real for him with these people. And many more believed because of his word. Him staying that extra day gave people a chance now not only to get to know him through this woman's testimony, but to now encounter him for themselves. And now even more people are believing. And they said to the woman, it's no longer because of what you said that we believe, for we have heard for ourselves, and we know that this is indeed the Savior of the world. And that's not discounting her testimony, but it's showing that the role that all of our testimonies play in transmitting the gospel and inviting people into the kingdom. Our testimony might be the first step for someone to begin encountering God through us and through our story and how we've been changed and affected by him. But the goal is never that that's the be-all, end-all, but that we're sort of a gateway drug to Jesus. Like, we want to get them to Jesus himself. We want to get them experiencing him for themselves and encountering his presence for themselves, not just with us as an intermediary, but to begin having their own testimony, to have their own stories that they can then go out and share. Because I don't want a million people on the planet telling everyone my testimony. That's my testimony. But I'm happy to share my testimony if it'll get you to consider Jesus and begin seeking after him. And then once you meet him, then you have your own testimony. You can then use that to share other people, and so on and so on and so on. Which is exactly what happened in John chapter 1. This is the exact pattern. This is just it writ large, because that was with a handful of people, right? Is, John and Andrew have an encounter with Jesus. They run and go tell their brothers and to go tell Nathaniel and Philip and others. And they begin to meet Jesus. And they're like, wow, now I'm blown away. Like, I was excited by hearing what you said about Jesus. But now that I met him, like, wow, he's the Messiah. He's the King of Israel. And I'm going to tell my family. Like, that's just how it's supposed to work. But it doesn't work that way unless we have had an encounter like this woman where our whole world has been turned upside down. Like, it has to be just turned upside down, which I think is part of maybe the subtle message and how John has structured this, because you have the Nicodemus conversation, which should have gone so well, because here's a guy who has the full Bible, knows his Bible super well, and it ends in a bad place. You turn to the whole thing upside down, and it ends in a good place, because she figures out who Jesus is and where the real temple is and how to worship him and all of that. You've got to have your life upended, that's all. You've got to come to the end of yourself. And if that really happens and you experience real transformation, because it's come not through, just head knowledge or facts and information, even if they're theological, but about you have encountered the living God, and you just can't live the same way anymore. No matter how much the world pulls at you, no matter how much you might want to some days, like, you just can't, because you have been ruined for this world by the one who made it. And now you got to live for him. So that's where we'll end tonight. Oh, Father, I'm so grateful that you are seeking after us. That's what Jesus said. The Father is seeking true worshipers. Because, Lord, we know that even though many of us, if we could all share our testimony, son, I'm sure many of us, our stories would include, there's a season in our life where we were looking for you, but we're looking for you in all the wrong places, or looking for satisfaction, or looking for fulfillment, or looking for identity, and in all of the wrong places and in the wrong ways. But we encountered you, each one of us, ultimately because you were seeking us first, because you loved us long before we ever loved you or knew how to love you. And so we just thank you for that tonight, God. And Lord, whether we've known you a few months, a few years, or decades, Lord, we just want to stay in this place that this woman at the well found herself in, where we just can't shut up about you, even to our enemies, even people we may not like very much. Like, we just got to talk. We just got to open our mouths and share who you are and what you've done and how you've revealed yourself to us. Because you're the King. You're the King of all kings. And you deserve the whole world to know that. You deserve for the whole world to know your name and recognize it as holy. And Lord, we pray that, but help us to move in it, to walk in it. Help us to look like you told the disciples to look, to lift our eyes and see the harvest field. It's so easy for us, God, especially living in the United States, to just sleepwalk our way through our life, even as Christians. To just be blinded to the fact that we are walking through unreaped harvest fields every day. We drive through past neighborhoods, communities that are totally oblivious. They may worship you in a way, but they worship what they don't know. And they've got no clue where salvation really lies. But we do, because we know you, Jesus. We know you as salvation. We know you as the way, the truth, and the life. And we know there's no other way to the Father. There's no other way to become a true worshiper of the one who made us without your Holy Spirit in us and without a personal relationship with the truth in you, Jesus. So help us. We can't do this without you, and we're so glad that you didn't send us out to do it without you. You said you would be with us always, even to the end of this age. And even though the age seems like it's almost up, God, we know that your promises are true. And so you're still with us even now. So empower us with your Holy Spirit. Open our eyes, wake us up, shake us if you need to. Whatever you've got to do to get our attention. We don't want to waste what time we have left on this earth. Come soon, Lord. Come soon. We want you. We want you reigning and ruling on planet Earth as you do in heaven. And so we ask all of this in Jesus' name, and ask you also to bless our food and our mealtime, God, and just the wonderful fellowship that we get to enjoy as a family, because you have made us a family. And it's no longer about ethnic lines and lineages and all of that junk. It's about having a relationship with you.